You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 9th of October 2024 on Monocle Radio.
Benjamin Netanyahu suggests that if Lebanon doesn't deal with Hezbollah, Israel will. The UK's chief spook gestures frantically at his teetering in-tray. And could an app turn us all into parking wardens? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Elizabeth Braw and Sir William Patey will discuss the day's big stories, and our On This Day historical series will recall the demise of possibly the single most overrated person of the entire 20th century. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Elizabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and author of Goodbye Globalisation, and by Sir William Patey, former British Ambassador to Afghanistan, Sudan, Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and political consultant. Hello to you both.
Hi there.
Hello.
William, first of all, you have recently been partaking of what is known here in the UK as conference season, when the various political parties all huddle traditionally at some town which isn't London and discuss their plans for the rest of us. Which one did you go to and what was it like?
I was at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, 20,000 packed, very upbeat, despite reports that it was depressing. No, we were hosting fringe meetings as the Labour Middle East Council to educate the Labour Party about the Middle East and to introduce the Middle East to the Labour Party.
Did you manage to sort the whole thing out?
We sorted nothing out. I'm sure there was a higher level of understanding.
Elizabeth, you have also been attending it's not a peculiarly British kind of gathering, but we do seem to be in the middle of the season of them, literary festivals. You cannot move for literary festivals at this time of year.
No, and I was fortunate enough to attend the best of them, the Cheltenham Literary Festival, and
that's just got you kicked off the list for everybody else's literary festival next year.
They all had the chance to beat Cheltenham, to become the best, but I was invited to talk about Goodbye Globalisation, and
seamless plug there, well done.
And it brought back very fond memories of the Cheltenham Literary Festival that took place during the pandemic. And I was part of it. I was invited to speak, and what was so special about it was that it was the first in-person event to take place. I mean, the first one I had attended since the beginning of COVID, and the organizers did such amazing work to make this hybrid event happen, and it was such a relief to be among people again after so many months of screen-only interaction.
Did you sell loads of copies of your book, that title again, Goodbye Globalisation?
I did.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm now just getting envious and bitter because I think the most copies of a book I've ever sold at a literary festival was like 3. You sold loads, really? Well,
the future belongs to you, Andrew. Just write a book and preferably about a timely subject, and
I've written,
the invitations will be coming your way.
I've written several. What more do people want from me? Anyway, we will start in the Middle East, where Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is attempting the complicated manoeuvre of playing good cop and bad cop. As he did to the people of Iran last week, Netanyahu has this week addressed the people of Lebanon with basically a find and replace script. You deserve better than being tyrannised and terrorised by theocratic weirdos. You are a great nation thwarted, etc. All of which is true in and of itself, though it remains to be seen whether Lebanese are any happier to hear it from Netanyahu than Iranians. By way of option, Netanyahu has offered to do to Lebanon what Israel has spent the last year doing to Gaza. William, first of all, can Netanyahu, not militarily, I'm sure he can, but politically and diplomatically, can he make good on that threat? Because he can't restrict media access to Lebanon in the same way that it has been locked out of Gaza. I mean, if if he were to go scorched earth on Lebanon, we would know about it in excruciating detail.
Well, we will hear about it. There are 20,000 Israeli troops in southern Lebanon now. He's given warnings to all sorts to the villagers in the same way they declared safe zones in Gaza, which turned out not to be safe at all. It's very rich coming from Netanyahu because there was no Hezbollah until the Israelis invaded Lebanon in 1982. The Hezbollah was a product of that, and the idea that the Lebanese should reclaim their country from a militarized Shia theocratic non-state actor is a bit rich coming from him, because he basically created not him, but the Israeli government created the conditions for Hezbollah to rise.
Well, all of which is pretty unarguably the case. But Elizabeth, Netanyahu, you can see what idea he's trying to sell here, and for those of us with memories reaching back to 2003, it does sound vaguely familiar, the idea that if you overthrow these miserable tyrannies, and miserable tyrannies they surely are, which oppress far too much of the Arab world, then something democratic, liberal, pleasant, amenable and collegiate will rise in its place. But that's not really usually the case with power vacuums in the Middle East, is it?
It's not. And I think we all need to imagine what it would be like if somebody did the same thing to us. A leader of a foreign country came to us and said, this is what you need to do in your country. We would not appreciate it. Why is it that we assume that other people, upon hearing the lesson that we deliver to them, we being the West or in this case Netanyahu delivered to them, that they would then say, oh, that's a really good idea. I think I'll do that because now that you have told me. People want to decide their fate for themselves. They don't want to be told or instructed by other countries what to do.
And he doesn't seriously believe that that's going to happen. It's just part of his propaganda effort. He plans to do as much damage to Hezbollah as he can. He's got a window of opportunity while you've got a lame duck president, in his last month and unable to act or restrain him. I think the hawks in the most right-wing Israeli government we've ever seen are saying we've got a window of opportunity here. We're going to take this opportunity to hit as many of our enemies as hard as we can until the pressure on us becomes so great that we have to call a halt.
I was wondering, William, in Middle East diplomatic circles, was there ever any chat that you were aware of about what might or could be done to actually shore up the Lebanese state? Because it's always an amazing subplot whenever Israel and Hezbollah get properly into it, that in a war being fought on the territory of Lebanon, Lebanon's actual government, such as it is, and Lebanon's own military are bystanders.
Well, they are, and Lebanon has been subjected to external influences all the time. I was in Lebanon in 1978, just before Israel invaded, but while I was there, the Syrian troops were there. There was an Arab force. Lebanon's had a checkered history since it became a state in the 30s till the 1932, the last sort of settlement. It's always been a state that's had to balance the differing interests of its religious and sectarian groups. So it's never been united in the sense that there's a government which all the Lebanese accept. The balance of power has changed. When the Palestinians were forced out of Jordan and ended up in Lebanon, they upset the balance, and that led to an Israeli invasion. So this is not new for Lebanon, I have to say, and I don't think the Israeli invasion is going to change very much.
I mean, Elizabeth, even if the people of Lebanon and Iran do not rise up against their masters at the behest of Benjamin Netanyahu, which I will grant is a remote prospect, is there any, or are there any grounds for optimism that if you have a Middle East in which Hamas has been effectively wiped out, if Hezbollah is extremely reduced, and with both of those things, Iran's options for meddling are incapacitated, does that create conditions in which the Middle East might be remade to hopefully everybody's advantage?
It does, and such a prospect does exist. But who are those people who could take the lead in making that happen? Who are the civil society leaders who might rise from this state of affairs and get people behind them? Will it be civil society leaders who are trustworthy and so forth, or will it be essentially undesirable people who take advantage of the situation? So if when you break something, you have to be ready for whatever comes after that to be worse than what you had before breaking the society or whatever it was you wanted to break before you broke it. So you can never know what it is that will come after. And the US thought it knew when it went into Iraq what would arise from the ashes of the toppled Saddam regime, and obviously what we saw was nothing like what the Americans had imagined.
I don't think there's going to be any reshaping. Israel may have seriously weakened Hamas, but they haven't killed the idea. They haven't removed justice for the Palestinians as a core issue in the Middle East. You've still got Iranian influence in Iraq. You've still got non-state actors and militias in Iraq. You still have the Syrian regime, which is heavily dependent on the Iranians. So the Middle East hasn't been reshaped. It might be reshaped in a way we come to regret. If the Jordanian state was to collapse, if the King of Jordan was to be, if the monarchical system in Jordan was to be overthrown, we'd be in a very different Middle East altogether. But the idea that you can have peace and security in the Middle East, or even that Israel can have peace and security, while the core issue of what happens to the Palestinians. I mean, there are very many thoughtful Israelis who realise that peace and security does not lie in crushing your enemies. That's a tactic. It's not a strategy. And the strategy for Israel's security is living in peace with its neighbours. And the Arabs have said, yeah, we want to live in peace with you. But in a two-state solution, with Israel living behind secure borders and a Palestinian state that it doesn't represent a threat to you, that's the way forward. But it's hard to see how we get there with Netanyahu and his religious zealots in government.
Well, I suspect we will have ample opportunity to return to this one, but we'll move along to vaguely related news. One of the UK's chief spooks has made a rare public assessment of the security threats facing the nation. Granted that someone occupying the role of Director General of MI5 is never likely to make a statement to the effect that everything's fine, it's all pretty quiet, nobody really has anything against us. To be honest, we mostly spend the day playing Risk. But Ken McCullum, for It Is He, did sound notably vexed about, in no particular order, Russian pot-stirring, Iranian mischief-making and the hardy perennial of Islamist extremism. Elizabeth, he did specify the GRU, the Russian military intelligence arm, as being, as he put it, on a sustained mission to generate mayhem on British streets. A question that has occurred to me many times over the last few years, possibly from the Salisbury poisonings onwards. Why does the United Kingdom and, frankly, every other country in Europe not simply just throw the Russians out?
Because we can't throw them out. We can't throw people out who are here under certain conditions, meaning they have visas that we can cancel. They are here as diplomats, and we can essentially revoke their right to be here as diplomats, but we can't throw all Russians out. And by the way, as a result of globalization and a lot of Russian money coming into the UK, a lot of them are British citizens by now. They are here to stay, and also there is the issue of strategy. So if we throw every Russian out, then the Russians will throw every Brit out of Russia and possibly others as well, and it would lead to dangerous escalation. So it is very difficult. But it is to be applauded that the head of MI5 has spoken so clearly as he did today about the threats facing the UK, because we live in this illusion that I just walked over here to Monocle Studios, I didn't feel unsafe, so the UK is safe. It feels safe, but that doesn't mean that the threats are not there. And what he laid out today is that the threats do exist, not just the threats, but the attempts to harm the UK. And this is something I think we need to get used to in this country, that other countries are trying to harm us, and we should stop living in this illusion that we're safe here. Why should we worry about national security? And I think the most frightening thing about these new forms of aggression, which is what I work on a daily basis, is that there is nothing much we can do about it. So if the Russians stir up trouble that is not military trouble, what are we going to do? We are not going to go to Russia to stir up similar trouble on their streets.
William, what do you think on the issue of if you have countries which have been identified by MI5 as making definite attempts to undermine the security and stability of the United Kingdom, and we're thinking in this case about Russia and Iran. What is actually the argument against saying to them, certainly as far as their embassies, their diplomatic representation goes, we don't want you here, clear off?
Well, we do that. I mean, we have probably expelled the largest number of Russians historically. I think it's over 750.
It is quite a lot, but there's still a Russian embassy and there's still an Iranian embassy.
Well, you have. I mean, as a former diplomat, I always say, let's keep the lines of communication open, keep the embassies there. We get as much use out of our embassies in Moscow and Tehran as they get. There are arguments of what more you could do. I mean, there's a current debate going on whether we should prescribe the IRGC, for instance, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. I don't think we need to prescribe them as a terrorist organisation because they are part of the Iranian state. So if we want to take action against them, we can take action against the Iranian state. We sanction Iranian institutions. We could sanction the IRGC without prescribing them. So we're not powerless to do anything. I think the fact that what we've got now is a combination of threats, because at the time when we weren't so worried about the Russians, the fall of the USSR, the Islamist threat was very high, so we ramped up our security services to deal with that. Now we've got threats, Islamist threats, we've got far-right threats, we've got threats from Russia, we've got a much bigger worry about Chinese threats. So in terms of he's not our chief spook, he's our chief counter-spook. He's the one, and his organisation are there to catch the spooks. I mean, he's just setting out the sort of dangerous times we live in, and certainly for me, and I'm pretty old, so my times go back a long time. I was born before the Cuban Missile Crisis, so I remember dangerous times. This feels like a very dangerous time. I may be cynical enough to also suggest that the timing may be related to the upcoming budget.
I literally preempting my next question, Elizabeth, do you suspect as well that there may have been an amount here of the Director General pitching for a few extra quid and some more staff?
Well, it's funny how with some regularity, articles appear in newspapers saying the Royal Navy is desperately under-equipped, and then a couple of weeks later the Royal Air Force is desperately under-equipped, and then lo and behold, a few weeks later the British Army is in desperate need of such and such. There may have been some desire by MI5 to get a bit more money, but that doesn't mean that what the Director General said is not real. It is real, and it's not just what he laid out in his speech. The problem we face is that the countries that dislike us or hate us can keep innovating in this non-military space. They have been doing cyber aggression for a long time. They've been doing disinformation, and by the way, we shouldn't get complacent. It was interesting that when Kate, the Princess of Wales, when she announced that she was ill and would be taking time off, people started speculating, spreading rumours out of just, I guess, boredom, because they had nothing better to do.
Malice as well, I think, could have been a factor.
Malice, definitely. But what they didn't realise was that that is not an innocent pursuit, because Russian actors watched what we are up to, and what turned out to be the case after the results of internet activity during this time we're in was that Russian bots and other accounts had been amplifying these malicious rumors. So Russia is very active in this space. Other countries are active as well. And what we should remember is that just because we don't see a threat, and just because the Director General of the MI5 may not be articulating that a threat exists or that aggression exists, it doesn't mean that it's not there. And I think this is something we have to get used to. I mean, I'm not saying we will see Novichok attacks on a regular basis, but they will keep trying to harm our countries in non-military ways.
But you look at the reaction directly on our streets after that appalling killing of those 3 children in Southport. The way that was escalated through internet, not all Russians, but the Russians were involved as well, in creating the circumstances in which right-wing idiots went onto the street and blamed immigrants for that. That created a serious disorder problem in the United States. And that's part of the Russian strategy, is to create disorder and create disillusion with democracy. They want to say that democracy is not all it's cracked up to be and create the sort of mayhem on the streets. So we have to take it seriously.
We do have to take it seriously, and if I may just add one thing, they don't even have to come up with crazy conspiracy theories. Our citizens do it themselves, and then all the Russians need to do, and anybody else who wants to get into the game, is amplify it.
Well, this coming Friday, the conclave of Norwegians, which awards the Nobel Prize for Peace, will announce this year's winner. It is a reliably contentious award, sometimes pretty clearly deliberately. Last year's winner was the Iranian human rights activist Narges Mohammadi, while the 2022 prize was shared among one individual and 2 organisations which were substantially dedicated to annoying Russia. If the bookmakers are to be believed, Russia's foreign ministry should already be at work on the harumphing press releases. Among the favourites are the late Alexei Navalny, Volodymyr Zelensky, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and the International Court of Justice. That's going to upset them in the Kremlin, any one of those, isn't it, William?
I think so. Quite political, and you go back. Some people have received the Peace Prize before they've done anything. I think of Obama. Obama. That was the sort of. We hope you'll do something. But
sort of a housewarming gift.
Yes, a housewarming gift. Yeah. No, I think I don't think you can get... Zelensky is a great man, he's very brave and he's leading his country against the Russians, but he's defending himself against aggression and invasion. That doesn't make him a peacenik.
Yasser Arafat won it.
No, I know lots of people have won it. I have my own candidate. I would give it to Amal Clooney for her work on behalf of the Yazidi women and the Filipino journalist who was under threat of death from Duterte, and Clooney's work on behalf of the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, both in bringing Hamas war criminals to justice and Israeli war criminals to justice, even-handed. I think she won't get it because she's too prominent, but I think she's done enough to merit a Nobel Peace Prize.
Elizabeth, do you have a favourite contender this year?
I sort of want Jose Andres to win, the founder of the World Central Kitchen. Mm-hmm. And this is an organization that brings food to people in crisis-hit areas. I mean, what more humane thing could you do than bring people food, regardless of who they are? And World Central Kitchen has done it all over the world, led by Jose Andres, and maybe the real candidate should be World Central Kitchen, not him, because it's an organization that is staffed by hardworking people from all over the world who risk their lives to bring food to people who have no other food access to no other food because there is war and conflict, and this organization, as I think your listeners will remember, lost several staff members in an attack while delivering food in Gaza. This is risky work, and they do it anyway.
I mean, is the prize itself, though, still a big deal, do you think, William? Does the person who receives it have notably more diplomatic heft than they did before they got it?
I don't think the Peace Prize. I think actually the Prize for Economics and Science and Medicine, I think they're much more influential in their fields. I think the Peace Prize is always controversial because you've got the loads of people who disagree with you. Very rarely is there somebody so outstanding, like Nelson Mandela or
Mother Teresa.
Mother Teresa.
Next thing you know, Mother Teresa. There's an argument,
and even she was controversial. There's plenty of people who had views on Mother Teresa. But so it's always controversial. I think you can send a signal, and I think the World Kitchen would be sending a signal about the importance of humanitarianism and dealing with people, helping people who are in conflict. So there is something to be said for that. But it'll be controversial, whoever it goes. We won't have a say in it because we're not Norwegian ministers or prominent Norwegians. So the list of people who are allowed to choose it is pretty narrow.
So I'm just thinking with my pedantic pub quiz contestant's hat on here, I'm not sure Mother Teresa ever actually won it, did she?
I don't know.
She did.
Did she?
She did. She won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Somebody in production is going to look that up right now and yell at me while we're discussing the next item, which is in Germany, where literally anybody is apparently surprised that enabling citizens to shop each other anonymously for relatively trivial infractions is being gleefully seized upon. In Frankfurt, a website was launched which would permit people to quickly and swiftly report parking violations via their phones. The site has proved popular and profitable, generating fines worth nearly €2 million a year, and there are indeed plans to expand it, though not regrettably sufficiently to call in drone strikes on e-scooters. Nevertheless, there are those who worry about what it has unleashed. Elizabeth, where are you with this? Is this merely just not efficient enforcement of the law?
My view is that we should all be using public transport. Then we wouldn't have to worry about all these people parking in the wrong place. But it is also the case that it's incredibly annoying if somebody has taken your parking spots or otherwise parked in a place where he or she doesn't belong. I'm not sure whether I would report somebody for that infraction. I have to go home and examine my reasons for or against. But the point is that there are too many cars in city centres, and the best way out of it is public transport.
What about you, William? Would you, if it was as simple as snapping a photograph and pressing a button to download the image to an app, would you drop somebody in it?
If it was an egregious piece of parking, I imagine some of you parking on a pavement and stopping, disabled people from going past or anyone getting past. I think I might. But the trouble with it is I probably wouldn't be, there are some people who make a living out of it or who would make it one of their hobbies. I worry it comes on the back of Russians snitching on their neighbours, using a sort of repressive regime to say these people have they have un-Russian views on the war, who speak against the war. And you've got people who have neighbourly disputes using it as a means of getting one back on their neighbour. So I'm in two minds about the state encouraging people to snitch on their neighbours.
Well, just to follow that up, William, by way of a case study, there is the remarkable 18-year-old Nicholas Mathai of a small-dish town in Saxony-Anhalt called Grafenhainichen. He has, according to most reliable estimates, so far shopped about 8% of his fellow citizens.
Yeah, he needs to get a life.
But the point here is a serious one. Is he not furthering the application of law and order?
Well, I suppose he is, but you can make a lot of money out of parking fines. But in Britain, there are enough cameras for the state to do that anyway.
I will tell you one time when I would have done it if I had the opportunity. I recently moved and I dutifully applied for a base suspension and I got it, and the council came and put it up. And then when the movers arrived the next morning, somebody was in that spot. Ooh. I would have reported him.
See, I literally would call in drone strikes on e-scooters if that option was available, if any forward-thinking person in City Hall is tuning in. Basically, though, do I get the impression, just a short word from each of you first, William, that you're not actually fans of this, that this is a bit of a slippery slope thing, that this maybe should be left to the whims of parking wardens?
I'm on the fence on this one.
Elizabeth, what about you?
I'm similarly on the fence, but what is indisputable, and I think everybody can agree, is that parking wardens should be treated with respect because they have an important job, no less important than politicians, lawyers and so forth, because without them, there would be anarchy in our streets.
We'll ask you that question again next time you get a ticket. Elizabeth Braw and Sir William Patey, thanks both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, our On This Day historical feature contemplates the end of a wretched life and the birth of an unworthy legend. The cliché to the effect that the camera never lies has never withstood serious scrutiny. Even before Instagram filters and AI undermined the testimony of images, cameras used to lie all the time. The selection of one awkward negative from a salvo of dozens of shots, the unflattering angle, the out-of-context pose or expression. But a camera never lied as perniciously as it did when it took what is, by some plausible estimations, the most reproduced portrait of a living individual in human history. A fixture of t-shirts, placards, posters, coffee mugs, murals, postage stamps, fridge magnets, album covers and cigar boxes, which made, in some impressionable circles, a saint of a sensationally undeserving subject. In 1960, the Cuban photographer Alberto Corda took a picture of Che Guevara, the Argentinian agitator who had played a key role in the Cuban Revolution of the previous year. Guevara was attending a memorial service for the dozens who had died in the explosion of a French freighter, La Cube, in Havana Harbour while unloading a cargo of Belgian munitions. Cuba blamed the CIA, and while it would not have been the first or last time the Americans attempted to violently thwart Castro's ambitions, ghastly mishap seems at least as likely an explanation.
The French munition ship La Coubre blazes at dockside in Havana after an explosion during the unloading of her cargo of small arms ammunition that rocked the harbor. The blast hurled a fiery rain of steel over a wide area.
Guevara was 31 when Corda snapped the shot. It eventually acquired the name Guerrillero Heroico and could not have endowed its subject with nobler gravitas had Corda composed it deliberately. Guevara appeared handsome and resolute, as if gazing towards the red dawn to which the star on his beret was guiding. Guevara was 39 when he died on October 9th, 1967. If Corda's picture was the foundation of Guevara's popular myth, his early death in picturesque circumstances sealed his role as the last half-century's preeminent embodiment of discontent. What are you rebelling against? What have you got? Guevara was always one of those people for whom the rebellion was more important, or at least more fun, than the cause. After Castro had seized power in Cuba, he allowed Guevara to amuse himself a while, overseeing the liquidation of counter-revolutionary elements at La Cabana prison, but had eventually appointed Guevara president of the National Bank, then Minister of Industry. For neither role was Guevara remotely qualified. In neither role was he much interested. As self-styled revolutionaries often do, he found the details, compromises and burdens of government tedious. Instead, he appointed himself freedom fighter at large, roaming the world, giving grandiloquent speeches.
Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas. Como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia.
Before attempting to foment rebellion elsewhere. In Congo, this went badly, as he wearily acknowledged in Congo Diary, an often bleakly, if perhaps not intentionally, funny memoir.
We had a chance to see some cases of alcohol poisoning caused by the famous pombe. This is a spirit distilled from maize and flour, which is not high in alcohol, yet has terrible effects. There were days when pombe washed over the camp, leaving behind a trail of brawling, poisoning, indiscipline, and so on.
He thought he might have better luck in Bolivia, where at least he spoke the language. This didn't go tremendously well either, as he noted in another diary found shortly after he'd written what turned out to be its final entry, and which was somewhat uncharitably reviewed by the in-house journal of the CIA.
The strategy and tactics that Che compiled in his handbook Guerrilla Warfare proved to be empty theoretics. His hopeless struggle and demise proved only the futility of the approach.
On October 8th, 1967, CIA-trained Bolivian soldiers closed on Guevara's encampment. Guevara, wounded, surrendered. His captors hauled him off to a mud-walled schoolhouse where, the following day, they received orders from Bolivia's presiding tyrant, René Barrientos, to execute their prisoner. The deed was done on this day 57 years ago by a Bolivian sergeant, Mario Terán, seeking revenge for the deaths of his comrades. Same justice that Guevara had dispensed countless times himself, it would nevertheless have been preferable if he'd answered for his behaviour in a court of law. Not just because it always is, but because immortality as the object of worship by a tedious personality cult would probably have appealed to him. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Elizabeth Braw and Sir William Patey. And Mother Teresa did win the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1979. That's me told. Today's show was produced by Monica Lillis and researched by George Ruskin. Our sound engineers were Elliot Greenfield and Steph Chungu. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily returns at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.